I'm Bhavna Nambiar, and I've been working with BizTalk 360, now it's called Kowai Limited, for the past 5 years as customer relationship manager. My primary role is to give a positive onboarding experience to all my new clients and improving relationships with both customers and partners. I have the privilege today to introduce our next speaker, Paul Larsen. Paul is a principal program manager with Microsoft in Redmond and has worked as a PM at Microsoft for over 24 years, always with a focus on enterprise platform integration. Today, Paul leads the product teams for BizTalk Server and Host Integration Server while working with customers and partners to migrate workloads from on-premise to Azure Cloud Services. In his session today, Paul will cover what's new in BizTalk Server vNext, as well as new capabilities for extending on-premise deployments to the cloud with Logic Apps, where you will get a solid understanding of the hybrid IBM connectivity capabilities and roadmap in this demo-filled session. I know there are a lot of BizTalk people waiting to hear what Paul is going to say. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Paul Larsen.
Thank you, Bhavana. 30 minutes. Well, I'm not sure how demo-filled it can be. I have one demo that should take 30 minutes, but I've been practicing it a lot, and so hopefully that one's only 10. And then as far as how much I can cover in half an hour, we'll see. Or I can keep you for an hour and a half, because you don't really need lunch, right? Yes, thank you. I do too. I'm hungry. Right. So, I'm hybrid. I've been here. I was here at the first half of Microsoft, and now it's the second half of Microsoft. I'm now older. I was really young when I started, believe it or not, I had no gray hair. And I'm an example of hybrid within Microsoft. I walk around my building, and we have kids right out of college, and they're younger than my kids by a few years, and it's like, wow, I feel like I'm an example of the legacy and the modern. And in fact, since I was here last year, our team, all of integration, has moved into Azure Compute, part of the core. So you've got Azure Storage, Azure Compute. Azure Compute has all the fun stuff. And so, yeah, it's definitely a younger crowd. So when we talk about hybrid integration, we're talking about all existing systems. Stuff that I've worked with for many years, my entire career at Microsoft and before, IBM, SAP, Oracle, TIBCO, and other line of business enterprise systems. How many folks use enterprise systems or work with your customers on the same? Come on, get those hands up there. Be honest. All right. How many people started in one of those systems? Really? Okay, I'm definitely feeling hybrid. Awesome. Not as many as I thought. All right. Also, when we talk about existing heritage, legacy, we're talking about Microsoft as well, right? So it's a real push within Microsoft to take advantage of cloud SaaS, if not IaaS, VMs, and so all of our properties on-prem as well. Now, BizTalk Server does a great job of connecting, integrating, orchestrating all of these different systems. It has for almost 20 years now. I started working with it, I think, in 2001, developing the first SQL adapter, and then my team was also developing the first MQ and SAP adapters and FTP adapters at that time. So off and on over the years, I've worked with BizTalk, and now I'm responsible for it. Now, BizTalk Server can integrate all these different systems, and also, as you'll see, we've made investments over the last 2 to 3 years to take BizTalk Server on-prem, whether it's running physically on-prem in physical hardware or VMs, or in IaaS VMs under Azure or Amazon Web Services, and it'll actually reach out to the cloud as well. We spent a lot of time investing in that since we shipped the last release. So with that sort of general premise for what we're talking about existing systems, we're talking about cloud hybrid, everything is hybrid in my world. PCs and servers and web, hey Klaus. Not just on-prem and cloud. Everything's hybrid. It always has been. Word processor. How many people have used word processors or typewriters? One of my first examples of hybrid was using a typewriter, a word processor, and a PC running Word, Microsoft Word, back in the mid-'80s when I was in grad school. So for me, it's always been hybrid. Never just one system, always electric and diesel, electric and gasoline, hybrid to accomplish the same goal. So it's with great pleasure that I can announce BizTalk Server 2020. Woohoo! Bottom right, for release availability this calendar year, by the end of the year. Woohoo! And you're taking pictures, great. Start tweeting about that. So it's very much a new release with new platforms. We're developing solutions that take advantage of the new Visual Studio. One of the biggest development tasks that we're undergoing right now is updating all of our designers and all of our plugins for Visual Studio so they work with the new model for plugging in designers. It's not the same model that we used in the previous release, and it's requiring a lot of engineering horsepower to do that. And it's probably going to be our long pole as we develop this release. We're going to support 2 new SQL Server releases. 2017 is in market right now, and that can provide for capabilities to run IaaS VMs with more reliability in terms of transactional state using always-on availability groups. And also the new SQL Server 2019 that's just in CDP right now. New .NET Framework is our build to target. And then Windows Server 2019, which is one of the main reasons we're getting this out by the end of this year. It'll be just over a year since Windows Server 2019 released. And again, when you run Windows Server 2019 in Azure VMs and you want to use clustering of DTC, that's the version of the operating system that has the UI for allowing you to do that. And then all the product packages that we usually have will be in there as well. Adapter pack, accelerators, host integration server, ESSO. Now, we haven't just been working on this for the last year. We've been working on this for almost 3 years now. And you've seen some of the new capabilities of BizTalk Server 2020 already in the form of feature packs or add-ons to BizTalk Server 2016. As I mentioned before, BizTalk is a hub for integrating on-prem, heritage, legacy, including Microsoft legacy and cloud services. We do that with some built-in, now be built-in adapters for the cloud. Logic apps, send and receive messages to logic apps through the on-prem data gateway. Service bus, event hubs for event-driven applications, publishing orchestrations as API management. We saw earlier today how Shell Oil in particular is using API management across all of their resources, both on-prem and in the cloud, as a way to publish their application endpoints. It's also a great way to control things from a centralized architecture like we're doing at H&M as well. And also the Office adapters that I showed last year for Mail, Schedule, and Contacts. And then one of my new favorites that I pushed for, it's still under development, but it's an adapter for Blob Storage. I think of Azure Blob Storage as a file system on Windows. And if I look at the telemetry, which I do every week for BizTalk Server, one of the most popular BizTalk adapters remains today, and is the most popular, file. And so, yeah, you can do it with Blob Storage, but you have to go through some shenanigans to do that. You have to, if you want to publish it as a UNC endpoint, it's not so straightforward. So a native Blob Storage adapter I thought would be applicable. We'll see. And then some other capabilities. So deployment. We're going to have a session later in the week. Samuel Kasberg. Samuel, where are you at? There you are. Cheers. Going to talk about deployment. One of the ways you can do that was a VSTS. I'm not sure if you're covering that specifically. Security. The ability to use Blob Storage again for backing up the databases. These are capabilities that we've talked about over the last 2 years. And then again, another new feature that we've been pushing. This is on behalf of one of our key customers, which you heard from today. They want a read-only administration model. Again, how do you secure your BizTalk server infrastructure? Well, you have different classes of IT pros that interact with BizTalk. Some are allowed to update the config, and some are not. So we're going to make it possible to restrict it based on a read-only administrative view. Some advanced scheduling, still pushing for more detail there as a follow-on to what we already offer in terms of months, weeks, and days. Looking for that. Industry standard RESTful, I never say that right, RESTful web administration. And then one of my favorite areas, as I mentioned before, I like analytics, which is interesting because as a program manager at Microsoft now, we're responsible for tracking usage telemetry. And again, we do it all the time. We look at it daily, sometimes or weekly, sometimes daily, and then every month we report it up to the muckety-mucks. They're really interested in that. And the great thing about BizTalk is it's been very steady and growing in terms of its usage. And so I like the fact that our customers can use the modern cloud-based application insights and the modern Power BI, which John talked about earlier, which are our business intelligence platform, to actually be able to richly immerse themselves in the eventing that you can apply to your BizTalk groups, servers, and ports. You don't have to rely on the older infrastructure that we have in BAM, which is based on older SQL Server and analysis services and reporting services infrastructure. And then one of our capabilities that was developed by Microsoft IT is here this week, and we talk about how they utilize infrastructure or integration software as a service, ISaaS. They developed for us a BizTalk migration tool. And because we've kept the architecture in BizTalk so common from 2010, 2013, 2013 R2, 2016 into 2020, you'll be able to use the server migration tool to dehydrate your configurations and then rehydrate it into new Azure IaaS or physical VMs as targets. I mentioned before that all the packages in BizTalk Server 2020 are getting updated, including Host Integration Server. It's an add-on to BizTalk licensing. It's for IBM platform interoperability. New Microsoft platforms, new IBM platforms. Some of these we've released already through cumulative updates. Then on the right side, I'm showing some of our .NET technologies, a couple of which I'll show today, that allow us to integrate with IBM systems from .NET programming infrastructure, from cloud connectors, from BizTalk adapters, and also custom applications like Azure App Service, Worker, and Web Roles. All these .NET components, we continue to evolve from release to release, where some of our older, existing legacy services like our SNA Gateway pretty much stay static. Those APIs haven't changed literally in 40 years. But the .NET components, we continue to evolve. One of the things we did in the last release was develop a brand new Microsoft MQ client. And that's because when we do cloud services, we want .NET Managed Code. We want all Microsoft. So we have a control over the stack. It makes it a little bit easier to provide the capabilities in terms of performance, scalability. And again, we noticed that all three of our customers talked about that, right? Once they get a development solution for the cloud, they want to be able to then have it be very efficient, secure, and we can do that by developing with .NET. So all these components have been updated or getting updated for this release. And the new version of Enterprise Single Sign-On. What you don't see are some things that we're going to have to come back to in the next release, and that is support for some of the cloud infrastructure beyond Blob Storage for backing up the databases, beyond application insights, beyond these adapters that integrate with the cloud system. We're getting a lot of push from our customers and from our executives who didn't have time to do it in this release, and that's support for Azure SQL managed instances and Azure SQL database. We started to look at this. We've been working with the SQL Engine team on this for a while, and the feedback for enterprise customers and partners is if you do something here, you need to be really clear about what works and what doesn't, and we're just not at the point now where that fits into this release. And so that's something we'll look at post-release. So switching gears a little bit, doing pretty good on time. Am I talking too fast? Really? Awesome. 20 years ago, I'd be talking too fast. Now you guys are great. Well, I'm getting older. I'm probably moving slower too. So my manager says that sometimes. I'm actually a long distance runner, and sometimes I limp around the building if I run a race over the weekend. So not getting slower, and it's just getting harder to recover. So another announcement I want to make is we have a new Logic Apps Enterprise connector. It's for 3270 screens. How many people know what 3070 screens are? Okay, maybe 1/5, 15% of the folks here. So think of dumb terminal, right? So airline reservations, sometimes hotel reservations, certainly anything related to railroads. They're using 3070 terminals. Car rentals, all right? If you peek around, invariably there's a dumb terminal. One of the big companies we have in the United States for warehouse shopping is called Costco. And in Costco, they actually have dumb terminals on these poles. You can step up there and you can do a search for a product. They just leave the emulator right up there. But 3070 terminals was the physical device, and then terminal emulation is the technology that IBM developed for PCs and that Microsoft has supported for many years. We have our own clients, terminal emulators, and then over the years we developed a server-based 3070 runtime that you had to write code to. It was a lot of code. You could write COM code, C# code. It's a lot of coding required, and I can show you an example of that. Well, there's an industry trend for cloud computing called robotic process automation. John, are you in here? Did I get that right? RPA? And RPA, we believe, will have a lot of screen scraping involved. Scraping of webs, server applications, 3070 and 5050, that's mainframe and asynchronous terminals as well. So we extended our HIS session integrator, as we call it, and we've built out a new connector. It's all managed code. It includes and is limited to TN 3070, that's Telnet derivative, so TCP/IP connectivity to the mainframe. It's based on session integrator, as I mentioned. It requires an integration account. It's designed for ICE, so you'll have a VPN connection back to your mainframe. And we've come up with a new design tool for scraping the screens, specifying the identification of those screens, navigating the screens, creating what we call a navigation plan, and then expressing a process or methods on top of that navigation plan with inputs and outputs. All really sophisticated technology on the covers and great value when you need to scrape these legacy applications, albeit a lot of work when you use it. I'll show you that right now. And then once you define these navigation plans with methods, you then can generate both C# code for the on-prem session integrator as well as a metadata file called a host integration data XML. And it's metadata that describes how the nature of the panels, how we recognize them, how you navigate them, and what the input outputs are to that instance of the 3070 connector runtime. Upgrade that to the integration account, go into Logic Apps, define an instance of the connector. It supports actions, not triggers, actions. And then you can list your metadata files that are in the integration account and wire up the connection, and off you go. I'll show you. I should just show it to you. So it's based on 3070 session integrator. It's just a block diagram. It can run on-prem. It can run an Azure App Service if you want to write code with our code gen capability that's coming out. And then it has a built-in connector. So let's take a look at this. This walkthrough can take as much time as you want. If you do a simple log on, log off, it can take a minute. If you do the one I'm doing, it can take half an hour. But let's see if I can be prompt. So I'm actually going to design this with a connection back to mainframe. So I'm actually going to connect this design tool back to our physical mainframe. And I have that defined here in the host settings for this TN connection. And if I connect, I'm connecting live to our mainframe, one of our LPARs. A little bit newer software than what it indicates here. I'm not sure why I haven't updated that. And I can start recording a session. So I'm going to go to a Kix demo region. I'm going to, those of you who are familiar with CICS, I'm going to clear that. I'm going to run a program. We'll go bank get balance. I'm going to enter username and PIN. This is based on some samples we have. I'm going to get back a balance. Kim Akers, who's actually a GM at Microsoft, she gave her permission to use this name many years ago. I'm not sure she knows we're still using it. And right now she has $30,000 in her account. All I can do is get the balance, unfortunately. Exit out of that, log off of Kix, and that's it. So that didn't seem like a lot, but when you go to wire it up here, it may take a little bit longer. All right, so the first thing you do is you capture the screens. Next thing you do is you specify how you want to identify what screen you're on. And I'm going to identify that I'm on the SSCP screen by using this field here. And then I'm going to recognize that I'm on the Kix screen by choosing this right here. I did this a couple days ago and I put the time in there. Well, of course it didn't work next time I ran it because the time was different. Low intellectual horsepower, not just age. And then I'm going to identify that I'm on this Kix panel application here. And then I'm going to show you another view of the recognition editor here and add that as a recognition point. But I don't want to check to see if the balance is there. I want to check to see if it's empty. Okay, so I know I'm on that panel if I have an empty field there. And then lastly, I want to know when I'm back at the SSCP screen again, and just for simplicity, I can use the same element. All right, and so what I've done is I've scraped the screens, identified each of the panels that I need identifying, so I know that I'm on that panel, and now I'm going to create a navigation plan. Give it a new name, Woodgrove Bank, get balance, I'm up to 4 now. And I start dragging these things onto the design surface, okay? And then I connect these up with a flow. You have decision points and flows from panel to panel. And to get from SSCP to the next screen, remember I type kicks demo, so that's static text to navigate me there. That doesn't change. I have from the kicks panel, I did a clear screen. So again, that's a static function key to get there. After kicks, I'm at an empty screen. It's like a hands-on lab here, tutorial. I don't need to recognize anything on that. And then I'm into the program. And I'm into the next part of the program. And then lastly, I'm back at the, oops, no, I'm not. I go back to another clear screen. And on this clear screen, I do CESF log off. And if you remember on this screen, I did a PF3 to exit, probably didn't tell you. And then lastly, I'm back at the SSCP screen. And if I sound impatient, I'm impatient with myself. I had this down to 5 minutes. I'm taking a little bit longer. Okay, so I've captured the screens, create a navigation plan, and lastly, I want to create a method that can have input outputs. New method, Woodgrove Bank get balance. And in order to have this work with multiple accounts, I'll set that as an input parameter for Kim Akers. Set this as another input parameter for the account. And then lastly, we're going to grab this is the output parameter, balance, and save that. And it's going to be Woodgrove Bank get balance 4, and I think it's going to be a little, when I come back in, yeah, that's a bug in the UI, sorry about that. Oh, I heard murmuring. Oh, the UI is not ready. It hasn't shipped yet. Actually, this is under house. It's available on the download center, so you use it with the connector. But yeah, it's not perfect. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and cross my fingers and think that I did it right and run it now. So what you can do is you can play it back from the designer. So this is going to play it back against the replay and playback file that I created. So all of the information in terms of the screens that I scraped, the recognition on the screens, the navigation plan, the static input to the navigation plan, like the name of the program name and the PF3 to exit the program, all of that and the method that I'm exposing, all that goes into a record and playback or a RAP file. And so I'm going to go and I'm actually running this against the RAP file right now. And that's the checking account number. Click OK. I actually don't expect I'd be so lucky as it works. I had it working 4 times over the last hour from scratch. So just walking through the steps, making sure that my recording is correct. It actually it'll warn me if I have an error. And this step's always a little slow, loading the program. I'm not sure why. Makes me think I forgot something. The other thing that the design tool lets you do is import BMS. So that's a Kix COBOL definition of the panels, which is another great way. This is taking too long. I think I made a mistake. So once you have your recording and playback, you then can generate code. See, yeah, same mistake. Yeah, I forgot one of my recognition fields. That's fine. You then would generate C# code and also metadata. I'll show you an example of that right here. And this is the metadata file XML. And then here's an example of the classes that we generate. So if you're familiar with Session Integrator, we now have this code gen option for you, which we look to support in Host Integration Server 2020. And then we switch to the cloud, where I have an integration account. Integration account, as I mentioned before, is where we store the metadata. And you would come in here and you would upload the metadata. And you would choose HIDEX as an example. Give it a name. And select the file. Which this one. And we upload that to the integration account. And then meanwhile, I'm going to go to my ICE instance of Logic Apps. I'm going to look at my Logic Apps that I have there. I have some already defined. I'm going to add a new one. And I'm going to use my own resource group so I can find my instance of the integration account. So I can see the HIDEX that I've uploaded. This is the only demo you're going to get, I can tell you now. We're already almost out of time. And so if we, that's weird. Here we go. Design this. Let's use a simple recurrence as a trigger. I complain about this every year for the last 6 years. Why does it start by minute? I want to start with something less frequent. I want this thing running in the background for every minute over the next week while I forget about it. I'm going to choose the IBM 3070 ICE instance. It has a generic action, which is run a program. Program could be a process or a method. Method has input outputs, process doesn't. So you get a process that does a log in, log out. You get a process with some decision points. And I'm going to check for some of the HIDEX files that I've already uploaded. Here's an example of one. And then this is the same program we just did, get balance, and it has 2 inputs. Add those parameters. Now I'm just going to put static values in here, not doing a really fancy logic app. This is Kim Aker again. And this is the checking account number. Save that. Let me point out that connections, I've already defined a connection here, but it's pretty standard stuff for connecting. If you know about telnet sessions, you need an IP address and a port. We support SSL. Code page, that would, in my case, would be EBSTIC 37. Of course, that's the default, so I'm covered there. And then the different device types. Yes, it does get very complex. And then lastly, show that this worked. Ta-da! Ooh, it worked. Come on, come on. You are still awake. I was wondering. Oh, I don't need to care about this stuff. I'm not gonna. You never know when you'll be working with us. You think you're all just going to be doing the exact same thing you're doing now. You never know. Did I think I would be doing this? No. After all these years? Certainly not. Right, and so here's the output, 41852. It's a different number because I went to a different server. And anyways, so that's all really cool. That's the new 3070 connector, and it's available now in preview. And the time I have remaining, okay, I want to mention a couple of things. So what we did there is we took an existing on-prem .NET technology, and we used that to develop a new cloud connector. We did that previously with a new MQ client to create the Logic App connector for MQ. We did that previously with a new version of our DRDA, or DB2 Informix client protocol, and created a new connector for Logic Apps Flow, Power Apps, Power BI, Azure Data Factory, Azure Data Lake, Excel. Now it runs everywhere. And So we work in partnership with the connector factory, I like to call them, and the business applications group, where all these connectors are mostly developed. But also within our org, we're developing our own enterprise connector. And we have a couple other technologies that I won't show you, but I'll talk about briefly. CICS and IMS and AS400 programs. Those were, the 3070, 5050 are monolithic programs where the screen navigation and the business logic and the data access logic, it's all intertwined, okay? They're very monolithic. Componentized, yeah, or modular programs that run in CICS, IMS, or AS400 that are callable through different mechanisms, we have a different technology called transaction integrator. Session integrator screens, transaction integrator for calling programs. There we have .NET clients for Kix, IMS, and AS400 programs where we're going to take those and develop a new cloud connector, which I'm not going to show you today. And also, we have .NET clients for IBM file systems. Remember I said file system is really ubiquitous, right? How many people know that for Azure, if you want to go on-prem to Azure storage, we have like these giant floppy drives. Okay, they're not floppies. There's two sizes. You know, one is like half the size of the podium, another one's about a quarter of that size. And you hook them up to your network, you fill them up, you drive them to the data center, and I guess you give it to somebody who has the authority to go inside, they plug it up, and yeah, we're still using floppies. But in any case, in order to avoid that, we're going to take our .NET clients for mainframe vSAM and AS400 physical files, and again, create connectors. What I wanted to show you, though, is that you can take these .NET components today, and they run already inside BizTalk. Also, the vSAM client runs inside Power BI. It runs inside integration services that John mentioned, SQL Server integration services. It kind of competes with BizTalk. It does the data stuff like Azure Data Factory competes with Logic Apps. And you can put all of our .NET components on your own custom worker role or web role in Azure App Service. You don't have to wait for us to connectorize these things, but in fact we are. So last part of my session, and I promise to be wrapping up now because my time's up right now, is our roadmap. We've done the mainframe 3070. That's at the top. At the bottom, you can see left and right the MQ and DB2 and Informers. We're going to update those. We actually think that we should build a new version of the MQ and DB2 connector that don't require the on-prem data gateway. Less infrastructure, and we can talk offline why that's the right thing to do. Scalability, performance, easier to troubleshoot. Where if you're using ICE, you'll have a VPN express route, a private circuit, right? And you can do class of service negotiation with a telco, and it'd be a great way to connect. And so if we come up with lighter weight connectors there, we can also not only make them more performant, more scalable, easier to troubleshoot. I wouldn't say more secure because it won't be. It'll be the same. But also we can be a little more agile. The connector factory has, what was the number? 300 connectors on their way to 500 to 700 or whatever. Whereas we care about the connectors that have value in BizTalk. We want those in Logic Apps, so we'll probably build our own there. 50-50. Will the next one be 50-50? Potentially. Will the next one be Kix or IMS or AS400 program? Let me know. Let me know your thoughts. Which one should we do next? But these are all the connectors we endeavor to deliver over the next, probably I'd say, couple years. With that, you can reach me via email. Also, my cohort, Valerie Robb, who's unfortunately not here this year, send me email. It's, as I always say, Paul Larsen with an E. It's Danish, not Swedish. Although, I did 23andMe. Do you know what that is? It's like DNA testing. Apparently, I'm more Irish than anything else. So at the end of this week, I'm going to Ireland. Haven't been there yet. Anyways, thank you all very much for your time today. I'll be here all week. Let's have a conversation.
Covey.co